In the first scene of the anime, some students are casually chatting, commenting on a couple of friends from the school they attend. Suddenly, a significant figure from the school walks through the crowd, and her name is Inukami Suzune, the student council president. Behind her, we see Ryusen Kasuki, the vice president. Strutting through the hallways like the ultimate authorities, the two students capture everyone's attention while promising to change the entire school regulations through well-elaborated arguments. However, behind these people who seem born to grab the world's attention are the ordinary students with nothing special to offer the world. One of them is Yusato Ken, a plain and common high school student. Amidst a monotonous life, perhaps the most exciting thing lately has been watching a bird's nest grow under this cold rain. But the truth is, Yusato is not happy with this mediocre existence. In fact, he wanted an extraordinary life, full of remarkable feats and fantastic challenges. Since that's not the reality, Yusato settles for going home and watching any TV show while stuffing his face with mayonnaise-coated Doritos. Speaking of which, it's time to leave school. When the guy goes to get his umbrella, it's no longer there. Someone probably took it. Still, there's one lying around nearby, but Yusato isn't the type to steal one to leave the true owner soaked in a storm. At least not everyone's out to harm others. Inukami and Kazuki, thinking of the student council's reputation, don't want one of the students to go home all wet. So the vice president lends his spare umbrella to the guy. Accepting the help, Yusato thinks that maybe this guy is alright after all. Just because he attracts a lot of attention doesn't necessarily mean he's arrogant. Moreover, even though the two have never spoken before, he knows Yusato's name and even asks if he prefers to be called by his first name or family name, Ken. The protagonist kindly chooses Yusato, and young Suzune approves the idea, leaving the boy blushing with her charm. Finally, the two most popular students in the school invite him to go home together, making the protagonist think that everyone will be jealous when they find out. So the invitation is accepted, and in the middle of the walk, Yusato admits he thought Kazuki was a bit arrogant because he only talked to the girls in the class, practically. Feeling slightly uneasy, the vice president responds that he talks more with them because they make an effort to interact. To Inukami, in other words, it seems no man cares to talk to him. As for the president, according to Yusato, he thought she was even more unapproachable, but the girl doesn't seem to understand why. So Kazuki speaks up to praise how brilliant she is in all subjects as well as incredible in any sport she plays. As if that's not enough, she's also beautiful inside and out. In other words, perfection in person. But Inukami doesn't like being treated that way and asks her friend to ease off the pressure. And right after that, Yusato takes the opportunity to ask if the two lovebirds are together, but both are clear in saying there's nothing between them and they only walk side by side because they are always dealing with council matters. Yusato feels a bit embarrassed for getting into this matter, but Inukami approves of the colleague's attitude because at least he didn't talk about them behind their backs. At that moment, the girl felt secure enough to return another question and wants to know what Yusato plans to do after finishing high school. The guy has no idea, but to his surprise, neither of the two prodigies knew either. Inukami can achieve any goal she sets for herself, but that doesn't mean she's sure about which path to follow for the rest of her life. Entering into this subject, Yusato immediately realizes that this is what competent people worry about, unlike him. At least even though they seem so different, Yusato knows well what that feeling of not belonging to the world means. And when the girl reveals this pain, the protagonist discovers that not everything is perfect in the lives of those two. Suddenly, the group hears the sounds of a bell, ringing louder and louder, leaving everyone confused except Yusato, who couldn't hear any noise. Until, inexplicably, a magical circle surrounds the three and seems to absorb their bodies towards another dimension. Startled, the two guys exchange glances and ask what's happening, but Inukami seems excited about the situation, eager to be taken to a place where magical things happen, unlike this gray and normal world where they lived every day of their lives. It is when they wake up in an unknown realm, surrounded by medieval warriors and a king dressed appropriately. Again, the guys remain perplexed by all of this, but Inukami can't hide her happiness at being in such an incredible place. Intimidated, Kazuki asks who those people are and what they are doing there, but soon a guard puts the boy in his place for getting agitated in the presence of His Majesty King Lloyd. However, the sovereign himself doesn't seem irritated by the young man's boldness, but calmly asks the three students to listen attentively. He is Lloyd Volgast Ullinger, King of Ullinger. He summoned those young people to be heroes of these lands because the demon king dared to invade this world with his army. Therefore, in the face of imminent chaos, the monarch summoned three beings with the potential to become legendary figures, capable even of facing the powerful demon lord. Lloyd summoned the chosen ones through a forbidden ritual known as the Great Hero's Invocation. And as the king spoke, Inukami became more and more excited with words like kingdom, ritual, demon, and forbidden. On the other hand, Kazuki is not enchanted with the speech and rants against Alinger's big shot because he doesn't think it's fair for them to be taken away from their families without consent. However, the king can do nothing, as this ritual only allows the chosen ones to be summoned, but is not designed to return everyone to their place of origin. Still, Kazuki seems like he's about to explode at any moment, but Yusato calms his companion in time. Suddenly, the king himself kneels in front of the 3 students and promises one day to find a way to take everyone home in the near future. And with everyone present kneeling before the young ones, the monarch humbly asks them to become the great heroes destined to save this great nation. And after this clemency, Inukami asks how Lloyd knows that the 3 of them were the great heroes, and in his place, a subordinate named Welsi informs that the magical circle of the great heroes invocation is designed to select only extremely talented individuals. The bells they heard moments before the invocation are the signal that they are great heroes. However, Yusato did not hear these bells, but it seems the poor boy stumbled onto the ship. The king's assistant seems to ignore this, and then she displays a crystal ball to measure everyone's magical abilities. While Inukami continues to be amazed by absolutely everything that happens in that place, Kazuki asks the protagonist if he is not outraged by all this abuse. Despite everything, Yusato is satisfied, happy to be treated on equal terms with the other 2, even though he is not actually a great hero. As he knew he could use magic nonetheless, he feels honored to be able to do something important instead of staying in mediocrity. Surprisingly, the vice president of the student council praises the companion's attitude, but surely neither of them is as excited as Inukami. After all, the girl is acting as if she had eaten a mushroom from Wonderland. And as she was already in front of the crystal ball, adoring the artifact with incomparable passion, Welsi invites the girl to be the first to put her hand on the ball. Soon, the magical object reveals that Inukami Suzune has an affinity for thunder magic. In addition, it was identified that she has a lot of mana in her body. So the second one to take the test is Ryusen Kazuki, and the guy activates the light magic color. However, before the person in charge explains what that means, the council president interrupts and fantasizes that her vice will be able to shoot laser beams from his eyes and wield magical swords made of light. Upon hearing that nonsense, Yusato warns that the vice president didn't understand a thing she's saying, making the girl turn to him with a somewhat annoyed vibe and comment on how sharp the tongue of this cheeky young man is. But at the same time, she changes her attitude and admits she likes this blunt way of the protagonist. That said, the perfect image Yusato had of his crush goes completely down the drain. Anyway, Welsi explains that light magic is very rare and its primary function is to dispel evil, with its power being unmatched against demons. Finally, Yusato Ken gets ready to lay hands on the ball, and before rubbing his fingers on the magic artifact, he wonders if he really has any talent of that kind. And if he does, he commits to helping his new companions in the mission they were summoned to fulfill. With this courage, he reveals a beautiful green in the crystal ball, and despite this color bringing feelings of peace, harmony, and tranquility, Welsi seems to express the opposite of these emotions. Terrified, she grabs the guy by the arm and drags him back to the king. In front of the throne, she quickly explains that the test was successful with the 2 chosen ones, but when she was about to mention the 3rd young man, the king interrupts with a joke, guessing that Yusato has an affinity for dark magic. At that moment, Welsi informs that he activated the green color in the crystal ball, and upon hearing this, the king frowns immediately and orders his subordinates to send Yusato away from the castle as quickly as possible. The guy is left baffled while everyone discusses what to do with him until the boy asks if there's anyone else with the same affinity. Before answering, the king starts to tremble, and nervously to the teeth, he reveals that there is one more person who awakened the green color. And at that moment, an imposing woman invades the throne room, knocking down the gate and asking the king where the chosen ones are. She stops in front of Yusato and asks if he is a great hero. The king tries to downplay the situation, saying that this kid is just an ordinary person they brought by mistake, but the woman seems to smell the green from afar. She introduces herself to Yusato as Rose, captain of the kingdom's rescue team. And even though the boy thinks this woman looks more like the type to take lives than to save them, he would never say that out loud. Next, Welsi tells that the great heroes are in the crystal ballroom, and when Rosie starts walking towards the other 2, Lloyd is relieved and promises to take care of Yusato's situation later. In the meantime, he should stay lodged in one of the castle's rooms. However, before the captain of the rescue team leaves the room, Yusato reminds that the king hasn't revealed what kind of magic he possesses, that green one. Hearing this, Rosie stops immediately and decides to borrow the boy. But the king doesn't seem willing to allow that to happen and orders Welsi to prevent the kidnapping. So she covers Yusato with a bubble and isolates him at full speed through the window, trying to shake off Rose. However, she's faster and reaches her desired object, delivering such a heavy punch to the bubble that its remains are thrown several meters away. With that, Rose finally gets what she wants, and with Yusato in her hands, she announces to King Lloyd that she will turn this goof into a responsible user of healing magic. After the departure of the rescue captain, Welchia tells the other two that their colleague was taken beyond the castle city and is in the hands of the Olinga rescue team captain. The kidnapper's name is Rose, one of the rare users with an affinity for healing magic. Despite this woman's desire to make Yusato a subordinate of her team, Welchia doesn't think the young man will be skinned alive or anything like that. Listening to the story, Inukami doesn't think it sounds too bad, but Welchia adds that Rose's teaching methods are, let's say, exotic. Meanwhile, already in possession of the young recruit, the captain informs her newest apprentice of his talent and explains that his healing gift is the reason he's being recruited into the rescue corps. Therefore, this house is now where he'll live during training. Now it's time to meet his new partners. For this, she calls her subordinates, and they all seem alarmingly eccentric. One by one, they introduce themselves and welcome the newcomer. The first was Tong, the bald giant. Next, a blonde with a parrot-like mohawk named Mill. Shortly after, Alex introduces himself looking like a crazed pirate. Gomo, a guy with spiked hair, had a huge scar over his left eye. And finally, Gerd shows up, a bizarre dwarf who looks more like a goblin. They all approach Yusato as if they're about to offer him for a ritual, but Rose quickly calms her subordinates and explains to the newcomer that none of them are magic users, but are useful in other, not always conventional ways. Finally, she explains that there are 2 healing users on the team, but they usually work elsewhere. Therefore, the newcomer will learn the hard way to master this art to complete the team. Every fiber of Yusato's body warns him that getting involved with this woman is a bad idea, but as soon as he earnestly asks to be trained by someone else, Rose turns away and informs him that training starts tomorrow. Then she orders Tong, the bald giant, to share the room with a new team member. And as soon as she leaves, the rescue partners warn in advance that the protagonist's life is going to be a nightmare, and that maybe hell itself is not enough for what the kid will go through at the hands of that crazy woman. Thus, bedtime arrives, and Yusato wonders if he's doing the right thing but tries to stay positive. On the other hand, Rose is also lost in her thoughts, questioning what this healer from another world might be capable of. On the following day, Yusato woke up wishing it had just been a bad dream. However, as he looked to the side and saw his new roommate Tong snoring like a Beetle engine, he was certain that this alternate world was real. Early in the morning, properly dressed in uniforms, Inukami and Kazuki visited their future healer friend. Kazuki was relieved to see Yusato well, especially since everyone was concerned about how he was taken by Rose. Yusato happily informed them that everything went smoothly, but when he remembered that his training with his eccentric teacher would start today, he lamented that his friends might never see him again. Due to the danger, Inukami asked if he really wanted to go through with this, but he was certain that it was the path to follow. Regardless of how they ended up there, the best they could do was give their all because the responsibility they had wasn't a joke. Proudly, Yusato asked what the two would be training in with their beautiful uniforms, and while the girl felt flattered by the compliment, her student council companion patted Yusato on the shoulder, confirming that he believed in what Yusato had said earlier. No matter how they got there, the best they could do was give their all because the responsibility they had was no joke. So the two friends left, and Yusato noticed that Kazuki was also having some difficulty adapting to this new world. They took him away from his family to call him a great hero in a magical medieval kingdom. Inukami, on the other hand, waved at him as if going to the beach, seeming much more comfortable in this place. Anyway, Yusato's priority was to train hard to become strong enough to be there for them when needed. But for that, he needed to be approved by his new teacher, and speaking of her, Rose appeared at the door asking if the conversation with his peers was fruitful. Intimidated by the captain's presence, he snapped to attention, probably not saluting only because his arms were trembling too much for that. Rose noticed his disturbed behavior and tried to reassure him, saying that it wasn't a prison and he was free to see whoever he wanted. However, she made it clear that he could only do those things when he wasn't training. Then she handed him a diary to write down his training routine and how he felt about it. As for the training, the first session would begin after breakfast. With that, she left, and Yusato realized that the moment of hell had finally arrived. After breakfast, Yusato was worried about the hype that Tong and the rest of the class had built up, saying that the exercises would be insane, but this first one was quite calm. Meditating standing up with hands on his chest, Rose taught him to feel the mana flowing in his veins. Seeing a warmth emanating from his chest, Yusato could feel for the first time the connection he always had with magic. Furthermore, another way to evolve is by studying the history of the world he is in. Although Yusato thought he couldn't read that foreign language, Rose showed that summoned heroes are gifted with a translation magic as soon as they step into this territory. The teacher explained that the kingdom of Linger and the demon country are neighbors, making them the main targets due to their proximity. The book he just opened contains information about the different realms in the region, races, and social politics. Up to that moment, the guy was sure he would do well if the training was only like this. However, the very next day, he started working on that cricket chassis, running up the hill in a hurry. His muscles begged for mercy, and the boy fell flat on the ground. Rose didn't ease up and asked who told him to stop. When Usato begged for mercy since his 2 knees were already gone, the teacher slapped his joints, making him roll in pain on the ground. However, like a child suffering just because he thinks he's suffering, he stops to feel his muscles and sees that this healing thing is for real. But with the little show the boy put on, Rose tells him to get back to work, and he continues his run with the certainty that he'll die at the hands of that woman. As he distances himself, she encourages him to run until he dies since she can revive him to keep running. On the 4th day of training, Usato started running with his companions, and everyone left him in the dust from the short-legged to the chubby ones. Rose continued to make fun, saying she's keeping an eye on the snail with a lap behind. Usato listened quietly but always saved the insults to pour them all into his diary. On the 5th day, he ran until the sun went down and sparks of his mana began to emanate from his body. On the 6th day, he ran in the rain and Rose warned that his speed was dropping. Distracted by the teacher, he stumbled and fell face first into the mud, and of course, he swore he would write all of that in his diary since he couldn't tell his teacher to go to that place. In this moment of anger, the guy's mana made a visible appearance, leaving him impressed with the magic coming from within him. On the 7th day, Rose casually kicked the boy's butt just to make him alert, and since Usato was irritating the teacher too much, she decided to increase the difficulty of the training. As he never said anything to insult the teacher, the boy soon thinks she found out that he offends her in the diaries. But as she doesn't know how to read Japanese, maybe it's written on Usato's forehead that he thinks she's a witch with a heart of ice. Whether discovered or not, Rose grabs the boy and tells him to keep running with the birds. And the next day, the teacher remains unaware of the boy, poking his butt so much that he thought his butt was going to become a base. But just as he holds his butt with his hands, his healing talent finally kicks in and heals his injuries. Not just the pain in the region, but his entire body. And that was the cue for him to finally trust in a healing ability and continue his training even without his teacher's command. With this discovery, he starts applying his new technique in the very next training session. And on the 10th day, he is still lagging behind his partners. However, despite running for hours, his healing ability prevents him from feeling fatigue in his muscles, always maintaining his form. Despite this trick, he wonders to what extent he would be ready to help his friends in a real danger situation. Immersed in his reflections, he tries not to show his worried expression as he passes by the teacher. Still, she instructs him to do 30 more laps with an accelerated pace. On the 11th day, Usato was already at push-up number 828 when Rose decides to reveal the reason he has been focused on physical exercises from the beginning. It's for him to be able to escape from the enemy as quickly as possible on the battlefield and to have the stamina to save his injured allies. The faster he can run, the faster a life will be saved in war. At the end of the training, Usato realized that he didn't get scolded at all that day, but instead of being relieved, it left him with a nagging feeling. So the sun rises once again. After running until the afternoon, Usato does push-ups until nightfall, making him feel lighter. On the 13th day, Rose probably noticed this, so she added weights to the student's body. On the 14th day, Usato's lunch disappeared. He asked the group if anyone saw his lunchbox as he left it on the table and only went to get a glass of water. Shamelessly, Tong admits that he ate it, but only because he thought no one wanted it since it was just sitting there. Unable to tolerate the disrespect, Usato throws a glass of water at the bald guy who, seeing that the boy is really going to fight, determinedly leaves while Usato keeps up with the pace even with the weights. A week later, Kazuki and Inukami visit Usato again, accompanied by a stern-looking warrior who seemed to hold a high rank. Mill points to Rose's pupil, who is doing push-ups with the teacher on his back in addition to a cement block the size of a washing machine. Furthermore, she tells him to pick up the pace while calling him a caterpillar. Irritated, Usato lets out an expression of anger, and Rose decides to ease up on the student, getting off his back and putting another block on top of the first one. Despite this, Usato doesn't back down and continues with the push-ups, even though he can barely move. Rose sees the scene and acknowledges that she will probably be able to mold the kid into what she wants sooner than she thought. The boy's two friends are amazed at his capabilities, and Inukami checks out the guy's muscles. However, not everyone is satisfied with the rescue team captain's training method, so the gentleman grabs her by the collar and tells her to stop this whole circus unless she wants to ruin a Linger prodigy. Despite the man's aggressiveness, Rosie calmly asks the old Sigilist to let her go. She recognizes that he has authority with the sword comrades and all, but she's the one in charge there. Additionally, Rose intends to turn Usato into her right-hand man, so it's ideal for him to undergo the most rigorous training. Yusato is surprised by this information, and Rose continues to praise the student's winning attitude, noting that he hates losing and never gives up. Besides, Yusato is a man who can certainly survive her training. Finally, she tells the student to rest and chat with his visitors, and Siglus leaves Suzune and Kasuki in charge of Princess Celia. With the students out of the way, Siglus continues the scolding, saying he received orders to put Rose back in the army, but he can't accept her transfer. In any case, the master clarifies that she couldn't accept it since her right eye is unusable. Meanwhile, the young heroes gather, and Kazuki explains that Siglus is the commander of Linger and the kingdom's strongest knight. It's this soldier who was training him and Inukami to handle a sword. Yusato is impressed by the wave the guys are catching, and then he asks who that young lady behind them is. She introduces herself as Celia Vulgus Linger, and upon hearing that surname, Yusato tries to rewind the way he addressed her, but the princess is just like anyone else and prefers to be treated simply. Moreover, she even brought a pie for the guys, proving that blue-blooded nobility can also be humble. During a snack, Kazuki asks Yusato if he trains at that intensity every day. He replies that not really, as today was much less intense, for example. Then he asks how the other two train, and Kazuki says their training is tough too, but Siglus and Welsi value the health and well-being of the students. Yusato likes that line of thinking, but unfortunately doesn't have access to it since Rose, according to him, is a troglodyte. Thus, he reaches out to grab another piece of pie, and upon seeing his friend's ripped triceps, Inukami decides to lift the boy's shirt to rub against that washboard's stomach. However, Kazuki interrupts in time and comments that Yusato must be suffering a lot, but the healer opens up, confessing that he thought a lot about running away but ended up convincing himself that he is evolving satisfactorily, even though his teacher is problematic. Additionally, he is getting along with the rescue team guys, so life isn't so bad. After all, he feels that one day his friends will become combat heroes and he will be in the rear, ready to ensure that no one gets hurt. After this brave speech, the repentant dog finally returns carrying a lunchbox for Yusato. However, the boy doesn't like Tong's attitude, acting as if he's doing him a favor even after stealing his lunch. In turn, the big guy also finds the returning companion strange, and the two solve the problem in the most peaceful way possible. And with everything at peace, Inukami and Kazuki decide to return to their lives in the castle. But before leaving, the girl reflects on why the three of them were summoned together to this world, and even though she is not clear on why this is happening, she is certain that everyone will do their best for the kingdom of Linger. Later, Yusato is relaxing in the bathtub, reflecting on how happy he was with the visit of his two friends, despite Inukami's somewhat intimidating demeanor. Nevertheless, she is right. His body has changed, he's faster, stronger, and his muscles regenerate even with this absurd training. As he vividly recalls, Rose taught that physical conditioning would be the salvation of wounded fighters, and their lives depend on it. Due to all this pressure, Yusato is unsure if he can bear the responsibility. After all, he may have strength and muscles, but the mind needs to develop at the same pace as war demands that maturity. Thus, another day dawns, and early in the morning, Rose throws Yusato's stuff on him and informs that they need to leave. The companions are excited about the journey, even though the young man himself doesn't know what's going on. At the kingdom gates, Rose intimidates the young Thomas with her desire to show the outside world to her pupil. Without hesitation, the guard fulfills the woman's wish and opens the gates. Thus, she takes her apprentice to a forest known as Linger's Darkness, famous for being full of monsters. Yusato's mission is not to return until he has hunted a grand grizzly. Desperate, Yusato argues that a blue grizzly becomes a grand grizzly after living for 100 years, and the book he read says that the blue is already quite dangerous. Still, even though he has gone through all this training without touching a weapon, Rose trusts her apprentice's talent to fight as much as to fly, so she throws her pupil into the infinite and beyond. Next week, we'll have more of this anime as soon as the new episode is released, so go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the like button below to support this video. See you guys.